It is explained that Holy Calendar Year 447 was an age of myth, and when gods, spirit, and sorcery ruled the world.
Leonis' death. Magnus, the last of the demon lords, reigned over the city of Necrozoa. There the battle between the demon lord's army and the 6 heroes drew to a close. We see that in the battle the humans are overpowering the demons, and they can also use healing magic to instantly heal their wounded. Inside the demon lord's castle, a maid informs the demon lord Leonis that the other demon lords have already fallen, and the 6 heroes are currently focusing their offensive on them. A wolf besides her mentions that this fortress, the Deathhold, is the only one remaining, and a dragon then attacks the fortress with multiple dragon breaths. One of the heroes also uses magic to attack the fortress with a giant tree, and Leonis can't believe that Arkiel the Great Sage has decided to side with the humans. He mentions that first it was Saint Therese and Serpent Lord Gisark who bent the knee to the gods, and now he has done it as well. He mentions that he will incinerate them all with his flames of darkness, but the wolf tells Leonis that the goddess of rebellion doesn't want him to fall here, and Leonis then remembers that he made a promise to the goddess of rebellion, and he puts his staff away. He states that he will accept his defeat this time, but he is an undead king, and he will rise again after 1,000 years to reclaim his throne. The story then goes ahead in time, and we see the 2 girls are heading into a ruin which was unearthed due to a recent earthquake. They are told through their comms that their mission is to investigate the ruins and locate the void nest there. They are told that self-defense is the only form of combat which is allowed, and the girls then arrive at the 7th floor while investigating, and they see no anomalies. Celia mentions that voids are creatures which make their nests deep underground, and they can't afford to let them run wild. Celia and Regina then notices some statues, and Celia thinks that they seem to be grave gods, things of significance which are buried with the deceased. Regina wonders if this is the tomb of a king, and going ahead they find a door, but they can't push it open, and Celia notices that it has something written on it. She tries to figure out what it says, but she doesn't recognize the language. Regina then wonders if this is going to take long, and she states that she will look over there in the meantime. Celia then touches the door, and it activates, and opens up. Celia proceeds inside with caution, and she notices some kind of crystal inside, and her counter then malfunctions. She notices that there is someone inside the crystal, and we then get back to the past and Leonis finds Riselia. He mentions that he knows that a vessel for Riselia's power will appear in the form of a human child after 1,000 years, and it will be his duty to find it. Riselia states that this is true, and she then leaves. In the present, Leonis notices that someone is trying to break the crystal he is in, and he doesn't understand the language they are speaking. He wonders if it has already been 1,000 years, and he uses a language analysis spell, and he thinks that the girl in front of him seems to be a grave robber. He states that she will suffer death for this insolence, and he breaks the crystal to get out. He then notices that the girl in front of him is really beautiful, and he thinks that she is even more beautiful than a species of high elf. He remembers that he was about to inflict punishment on this girl, and Celia wonders what a child is doing in a place like this. Leonis then finds out that he is in the body of a child, and he wonders if the reincarnation ritual failed. He wonders why he has returned to the form he had when he was known as Leonis the hero, and Celia then asks Leonis how he got trapped here. She checks if he is hurt, and Leonis gets embarrassed to be so close to a beautiful girl. Celia wonders if Leonis's memories are fuzzy, and she mentions that he doesn't need to worry anymore as she will keep him safe. Leonis then faints and the scene cuts to him eating some biscuits. He thinks that he lost his sense of taste many centuries ago, but the texture seems nice. He then thinks that this body is really pathetic, and he can't believe that he, a demon lord, lost consciousness due to hunger. He thinks that he also can't believe that he finds this girl pleasant, and he blames his behavior on his human body. Leonis thinks that he does owe this girl his life for sharing her rations with him, and Celia then introduces herself, and she mentions that she is a member of the 18th platoon at the 7th Assault Garden's Excalibur Academy, and she is 15 years old. Leonis thinks that he didn't understand anything she just said, and he thinks that he might be able to use his childlike appearance to get information about the present from her. He then introduces himself as Leonis Magnus, and he mentions that he is 10 years old. Celia wonders if a void kidnapped Leonis and locked him here, and Leonis wonders what's a void. Celia thinks that maybe Leonis has amnesia if he doesn't know about the voids, and she mentions that voids are enemies of humanity that started appearing 64 years ago.
They don't know what they want, but it is said that they come from another world. Leonis thinks he doesn't understand this, and Celia mentions that they came here to conduct an investigation on the voids, as it's pretty common to find them in ancient ruins. Leonis then asks Celia what year this is, and Celia mentions that it's the 64th year of the unified human calendar. Leonis wonders what's the unified human calendar, and they then feel some tremors, and Celia protects Leonis from some rubble. A void comes into the room, and Celia states that it's an ogre-class void. Leonis thinks that this looks nothing like an ogre, and Celia attacks the void with her gun, but it has no effect on the void. Leonis then tries to fight the void, but he trips on his own clothes. Regina then comes there, and she manages to injure the void with her holy sword. She wonders who the kid is, and Celia states that she will explain later.
Leonis wonders what kind of weapon Regina is carrying, and he thinks that it doesn't seem like magic.
He notices that the output of her weapon is on par with a Phase 4 spell, and Regina then tells Celia and Leonis to head for the exit while she takes care of the void. Celia leaves with Leonis, and on the way Leonis thinks that nothing is going according to his plan. He thinks that he is in no position to restore his kingdom in this body of his, and he thinks that he is tempted to go back and kill that void for wreaking havoc in his mausoleum, but this girl is his only source of information. He thinks that it will be easier to get information out of her if he conceals his identity as the Demon King, and a void then appears in front of Celia and Leonis. Celia mentions that it's a wyvern-class void, and Leonis thinks that this doesn't look anything like a wyvern. Celia tells Leonis to run away while she takes care of the void, and Leonis then tries to attack the void, but Celia uses her own body to shield Leonis from the void's attack.
Seeing Celia mortally wounded makes Leonis angry, and Celia tells Leonis to find Regina and get to the surface.
Some more voids then show up there, and Celia dies. Leonis then remembers the time when he first met Riselia, and at the present he is angry at the voids for killing Celia when he let her live for his own amusement. He uses a barrier to protect himself from them, and he thinks that they deserve a fate worse than death for killing her. Leonis then uses Phase 8 magic to take care of the voids, and he notices that the void's bones manage to survive even after being hit by a Phase 8 spell. Leonis then feels weak, and he thinks that in this body his magical powers are only 1/3 of what they used to be. He thinks that he is a demon lord, and the life of a human doesn't matter to him, but he must pay tribute to a soul as noble as Celia's. He then uses magic to bring Celia back from the dead, and he thinks that he can't use recovery magic, but he will do what he can. He thinks that she will be angry with him when she finds out what he has done, and Regina then states that she has taken care of the void, and she tries to contact Celia, but she doesn't hear any response from her. Leonis hears Regina's voice, and he thinks that this must be some sort of communication device, and he thinks that he never knew that humans would be able to make something so complex. Celia then wakes up, and she is glad that Leonis is alright, and she wonders what happened to her injuries. Leonis mentions that they weren't as bad as they looked, and he states that he used healing sorcery on her.
Celia wonders what sorcery is, and she wonders if it's some sort of holy sword power.
She states that Excalibur Academy has documented cases of holy swords with healing powers, and Leonis thinks that he should go along with this. He mentions that he doesn't know a lot about these powers, and he wonders what a holy sword is. Celia explains that the holy swords are a type of power that arose in the humans to fight the voids, when they first appeared 64 years ago, and the majority of abilities took the shape of weapons, so people started calling them holy swords. Leonis states that this must be what Regina was using, and Celia mentions that Regina's holy sword is named Draghowl, and she mentions that they seem to embody the personality of the wielder. She states that she is yet to be blessed by a holy sword of her own, and Regina then comes there, and seeing Celia's injury, she wonders if they also fought a void. Celia then asks Leonis what happened to the void from earlier, and Leonis mentions that it suddenly vanished out of nowhere. Celia states that voids do tend to behave in ways that they don't understand, and they then get out of the ruins. Celia then asks Leonis to hop on her bike, and on the way Regina introduces herself. She notices that Leonis is looking at her chest, and she calls him lewd. Celia asks Regina to not be weird, but Regina continues to tease Leonis, and Leonis can't believe that a demon lord like him is being ridiculed by a mere girl.
They then arrive at their destination, and Celia mentions that this is 7th Assault Garden, humanity's last stronghold, built in an effort to resist the voids.
The story goes back in time by 6 years, and we see that a large number of voids have attacked Second Assault Garden. The Holy Knights are fighting the voids, and some people are kept safe in a shelter. We see that Celia and Regina are among those people, and Regina is scared hearing all the cannon fire outside. Celia assures Regina that it's going to be alright as her dad is fighting and commanding everyone in the front lines, and Regina states that this is the first time she has seen so many voids at once. Celia then talks about her mother and the rest of her family, and she assures Regina that they are going to be fine. We see that she is also panicking, but she is trying to be strong for Regina. The scene then cuts to the people in the shelter coming out, and they find out that all the holy swordsmen who fought against the voids are dead. Celia can't believe this, and she apologizes to Regina for lying to her. The scene then cuts to Celia and Regina entering the 7th Assault Garden with Leonis, and Leonis thinks that this whole place is like a stronghold. Regina mentions that this is also the place where they live, and Celia states that this is a place that they have to keep safe. Leonis then thinks that he never imagined that humans could make an island like this, and Regina mentions that it's not an island, it's a megafloat. She mentions that traveling across the sea to seek and destroy void colonies on the front lines is the mission assigned to the assault gardens. Leonis can't believe that this entire place can move, and Celia informs her superiors that they have rescued a young refugee boy, so they will be bringing him back to the dorms. She mentions that he also seems to possess a holy sword, and Regina is surprised that Leonis has already awakened his holy sword. Celia mentions that Leonis is the one who healed her injury, and Regina states that she only thought of Leonis as a helpless refugee kid. Leonis then wonders if they are using the word refugee to refer to him, and Celia remembers that Leonis still has amnesia, and Regina explains that refugees are people who have been driven from their homelands by invading voids. Celia states that searching for refugees in various countries is also another one of the Assault Garden's missions. Celia then mentions that Leonis doesn't need to worry as he will be living with them at Excalibur Academy, and she explains that Excalibur Academy is an educational institution for people who can use holy swords. She mentions that all the kids who have awakened their holy swords have an obligation to enroll there, and in exchange they are provided with certain standards of living. She mentions that Leonis can let her handle all the paperwork, and Regina then goes to do some shopping before heading back to the dorms. Celia then tells Leonis that all outsiders have to undergo an examination after entering through that door, and she leaves telling Leo to complete his examination. Leo then goes inside the door, and he thinks that his plan was to rebuild his demonic army and bring humanity to its knees, but he didn't expect the humans to have advanced by leaps and bounds, and he also didn't expect those void things to appear. Leonis then summons his servants named Blackus and Sherry, and he mentions that it's been a long time. Blackus wonders how the Demon Lord ended up looking like that, and Leonis mentions that the reincarnation ritual didn't go as planned. He mentions that he was brought back in his human form from the old days, and Sherry mentions that she finds Leonis's current appearance adorable. Leonis wonders if Sherry is making fun of him, and Sherry apologizes to him. Leonis then explains to them that this is an artificial island created by the humans, and they mentioned that this is their 7th mobile fortress, which means that there are 6 more islands like this. Sherry mentions that she finds it hard to believe that humans were able to build something this intricate, and Leonis mentions that this world is drastically different from the one he imagined before being reincarnated. He mentions that before attempting to rebuild his army they need to analyze humanity's current strength, and he wants the two of them to investigate this place. He mentions that sorcery seems to have died in this era, so using any spells might arouse suspicion, and he asks them to be careful. Sherry wonders what Leonis would be doing in the meantime, and Leonis states that he will be infiltrating the humans' military education facility, as his current form does need food and other necessities to survive. Sherry thinks that Leonis would be mooching off the humans, and she thinks that she wanted to be the one to take care of him in his current form. The servants then leave, and Leonis goes through the examination before entering the city. In the examination they scan and sanitize him, and on the next stage of the examination some alarms start going off, but they stop as soon as Leonis suppresses his mana. Leonis then completes the examination, and he gets an ID card. Celia takes the card and she mentions that now she has everything she needs to schedule Leonis's Holy Sword inquiry, and she explains that whenever someone enrolls in the academy, they have to register the properties of their Holy Sword. Leonis thinks that he will have to fool them, and Celia then mentions that she will be keeping this card with her as it's an important card which proves Leonis's identity. Celia then states that she will give Leonis a quick tour of Excalibur Academy before heading to the dorms, and while on the way Leonis states that this place seems quite peaceful despite being on the front lines. Celia mentions that their holy swordsmen do get dispatched to the front lines, but the 7th Assault Garden has always prevented any voids from directly invading. Celia then shows Leonis the central command tower of Excalibur Academy, and she mentions that this is the cornerstone of this city, and all military affairs are handled there. Leonis thinks that this building is even bigger than his castle Deathhold, and Celia then shows Leonis the other facilities around Excalibur Academy. She mentions that there are more facilities in the academy, and she states that there is also a bathhouse and a dance hall. Leonis wonders what purpose do those facilities have, and Celia mentions that holy swords are weapons that are brought forth by the heart of the swordsman, and the swordsmen can't use their full power if they are disheartened. Celia states that in the past they also had a facility for military drills in the 2nd Assault Garden, but it wasn't very effective. Leonis thinks that this doesn't seem like a conventional education facility, and Celia then shows Leonis the place where his holy sword inquiry will be conducted tomorrow. Celia then starts to feel a little under the weather, and Leonis wonders if she is okay. Celia states that she is fine, and she thinks that she also needs to train after resting for a while as she needs to get her holy sword as soon as possible. Leonis then thinks that it seems strange that this girl who doesn't even have the power of a holy sword would be enrolled in a military academy, and they then come across a man named Musel Rhodes. Musel notices the scar on Celia and he wonders if Celia volunteered to go on another investigation mission that she is unfit for. Celia tells Leonis that they should leave, but Musel doesn't allow them to leave, and he wonders who this little guy is, and he wonders if Celia has also taken up babysitting now. Celia mentions that this boy is a holy swordsman, and Musel can't believe this. Leonis thinks that it's natural for Musel to disrespect him, so he will let this go, and Musel then asks Celia to quit breaking her back and just join his platoon. He mentions if Celia joins a platoon at the top of the hierarchy then she won't have to worry about being expelled from the academy, and he states he is willing to take her in even if she can't manifest her holy sword despite it being in her blood. Leonis then realizes that Celia's lineage brought high expectations for her but she wasn't able to live up to them. Musel states that Celia just has to become one of her dolls, and Leonis wonders if Musel is controlling the other girls with him, using some sort of holy sword power, and Celia mentions that she is not interested and she tries to leave, but Musel grabs her hair. This makes Leonis angry, and he uses his magic to make Musel bow, and he whispers in his ear that he is going to make sure that Musel never lays his hands on Celia's hair again. Musel then activates his holy sword, and a girl named Elfine then comes there, and she mentions that the use of holy swords for personal conflict is forbidden. She mentions that this area is a part of the female dorms, and she asks Musel to leave here immediately or she will send the footage of this to the administration bureau. Musel then leaves, and Elfine thinks that this must be the boy they found at the ruins, and she introduces herself as Elfine Fillet. She mentions that she is a member of Celia's platoon, and she is in charge of data analysis. Leonis then wonders if these spheres are also some kind of holy sword, and he thinks that they sure come in different shapes and sizes. Elfine then apologizes to Celia for not being able to accompany her on today's mission, and she states that it took her longer to process the requested data for the administration bureau. Celia then starts to feel under the weather again, and Leonis thinks that she is getting close to running dry. Celia then takes Leonis to her dorms, and Leonis thinks that this building seems a little older than the other dorms. Celia states that the living quarters are assigned according to the achievements of a platoon, and Leonis wonders what's a platoon. Celia explains that it's a combat unit comprised of holy swordsmen. She mentions that this academy runs on a merit system so platoons with higher ranks get newer dorms. Celia then notices that Regina is asleep, and she thinks that she expected this, as using a holy sword takes a lot out of someone. Leonis then wonders if the doors here have locks, and Celia states that they don't. Leonis then wonders if it's not a problem for him to be in the female dorms, and Celia states that it's fine as Leonis is just a kid. Celia mentions that they will go to the academy mess hall after they have taken a bath, and she tells Leonis to go ahead to take a bath first. Leonis then takes off his clothes in the bathroom, and Celia wonders if Leonis would like to join their platoon after joining the academy.
Leonis then sneezes, and Celia mentions that they will talk about this later. Leonis then takes a bath, and he is astounded seeing new kinds of technology in the bath. Celia then comes into the bath, and she states that Leonis needs to use the shampoo on his hair, not the soap. Leonis wonders what she is doing here, and Celia is surprised that Leonis is shy of being seen naked, and she mentions that she will scrub Leonis down. While scrubbing, Celia mentions that Leonis is free to join any platoon he wants, and she states that holy swords that can heal are valuable, so Leonis will be getting a lot of offers. She mentions that meanwhile in her platoon, she still hasn't awakened her holy sword, so there is little reason for Leonis to choose their platoon, but if he is still interested in spite of this, she would love to have him. Leonis then wonders why Celia is so driven to put herself in danger, and Celia states that she doesn't want to be protected, and she wants to fight herself. Celia then feels weak, and she falls, and Leonis picks her up, and he lets her drink his blood. Celia then comes to her senses, and she wonders why she did that. Leonis then tells Celia that earlier when he said that he healed Celia with the power of his holy sword, he was lying, and he states that he doesn't have the power to revive the dead. Celia mentions that she doesn't understand, and Leonis states that the person named Celia is dead. The story then goes back in time by 2 years, and we see that Celia is using a sword to fight some robots, but she is no match for them, and Regina is worried about her seeing this. Celia thinks that the techniques that her sister taught her are buried into her memory, and if holy swords are manifestations of the soul, then hers should take the shape of a sword. Musel then comes there, and he stops the robots, and he tells Celia that there is no point in training like this. He states that she should just take him up on his offer of joining his platoon, and he wonders how long she is going to be this stubborn, as she doesn't even have a holy sword. Regina then uses her holy sword to scare off Musel, and Musel leaves. Regina then tells Celia that she knows that Celia is going to make quick work of guys like these when she gets her holy sword, and Celia mentions that this is not the reason why she wants a holy sword. The story then returns to the present, and Celia wakes up in bed. She wonders how she got here from the bathroom, and Leonis mentions that he carried her here. Celia then asks Leonis who he actually is, and Leonis mentions that he is the reincarnation of an ancient sorcerer. He mentions that back in the day magic was a skill that people harnessed themselves, and the same sorcery is how he resurrected her as one of his minions. He mentions that he used a level 10 spell called Create Elder Undead, and she is now a vampire queen, the most prestigious type of undead there is. He explains that her weakened state yesterday was due to insufficient mana, and that's why she needed his blood. He mentions that it was a natural response as she needed to replenish her mana supply, and Celia thinks that Leonis wasn't kidding when he said that she died. Celia then tells Leonis a bit about herself, and she states that she was attacked by voids when she was 9 years old, and it was a large-scale outbreak called a stampede. She mentions that everyone in her family was a holy swordman, and they fought to protect the city's inhabitants, and they died. Regina and her survived in the shelter, and Excalibur Academy took custody of them. She states that being a holy swordsman runs in her blood, and she thought that fighting voids might speed up the awakening process. This was her rationale for participating in dangerous missions, but she has been unable to live up to their expectations. Celia then wonders if she can still be blessed with a holy sword, and Leonis mentions that he doesn't know that, but now she is going to be vastly stronger than before. Celia hopes that Leonis is right, and Leonis's stomach then growls. Celia remembers that Leonis hasn't had anything to eat since last night, and the scene cuts to them in the cafeteria. Celia thinks that she doesn't have much of an appetite, and she wonders if she can still eat food. Leonis states that she can, but her body's digestive system isn't very efficient at converting food into mana. Celia then asks Leonis what he is going to have, and Leonis mentions that he will have a pastry, as he doesn't recognize most of the items in this menu. Leonis then mentions that he will pay for his meal himself, and he tries to give Celia a gold coin, and Celia wonders what this is. Leonis states that it's a raider coin, and one of these can buy everything in this whole restaurant. Celia mentions that Leonis can't use that, as the assault garden only use credit as payment, and Leonis thinks that gold should still be precious even if it can't be used as currency. Celia mentions that it's not, and she states that alchemically forged silver is far more valuable. Leonis wonders if this means that the 2,000 coins he set aside for rebuilding his kingdom are essentially worthless, and he then notices some bouncers troubling a girl for money.
The girl asks them to wait until she gets her paycheck the next week, but the bouncer starts to misbehave with her, and the girl teaches them a lesson using her sword. She asks them to come back next week, and the bouncers leave. Seeing this, Leonis thinks that the girl is well versed with the sword, and Celia then asks the girl named Sakuya who those guys were. Sakuya mentions that they were bouncers from the casino she visited yesterday, and she apologizes for not being able to accompany Celia on her mission yesterday. She mentions that she went to the casino in hopes of striking it rich, and as a result she is flat broke right now.
Sakuya then notices Leonis, and she wonders if he is the kid with the holy sword, and Celia thinks that Sakuya must have heard about this from Elfine. Celia then tells Leonis that Sakuya is their platoon's vanguard attacker, and even as a newcomer she has slain several voids on her own. Celia then buys lunch for both Leonis and Sakuya, and they thank her for it. Leonis then states that Sakuya's clothes seem different from the traditional academy uniform, and Sakuya mentions that it's a traditional attire of Auron, her homeland. She states that it's a memento of her sister, and she mentions that her entire clan was wiped out by voids, so she decided to dedicate herself to killing those creatures. Some girls then come there, and we find out that Sakuya owes money to them as well. The scene then cuts to a woman named Diglass Alto telling Leonis that she will be conducting his inquiry today. She mentions that she is just here to determine the type of Leonis's holy sword, and she asks Leonis to show her his holy sword. Leonis then takes out his staff, and Diglass wonders what type of holy sword this is. Leonis states that it's a support type, and he wonders what these robots are. Diglass states that these are void simulators and Leonis is going to fight them. Leonis then easily defeats all of the void simulators, and Diglass is surprised to see this. Leonis thinks that he meant to hold back a little, and Diglass thinks that a support-type holy sword shouldn't be capable of that. She thinks that this requires thorough investigation, and she states that she needs to prepare an alternate simulator. Mucel then comes there, and he mentions that Diglass can let him fight Leonis instead. He states that he does have the necessary qualifications to handle this inquiry, and Leonis wonders if Mucel is going to stand in for this pile of garbage. Mucel and his platoon then equip their holy swords, and Celia thinks that fighting 4-on-1 is totally unfair. Mucel mentions that it's not unfair as he is controlling these girls using his holy sword's ability, and Leonis thinks that he will just have to defeat them all then. Celia states that she will also fight with Leonis as she is her guardian, and Diglass allows this. Mucel mentions that he has a condition for letting her fight, and he states that Celia will have to join his platoon if she loses. Leonis agrees to this, and he mentions that Mucel will have to swear that he will never mess with Celia if he loses. Mucel agrees, and Celia borrows a sword for this fight. Diglass then mentions that the first person to surrender or lose consciousness will be the loser, and the fight then starts. Celia crosses swords with two of Mucel's girls first, and Leonis thinks that this level of skill is not just from Celia's vampire transformation. He thinks that she must have trained hard, and one of the girls then goes to fight Leonis, but Leonis manages to hold her off using his magic. Celia then wonders if Mucel is only going to hide behind these girls, and Regina then also comes there, and she thinks that she overslept. She then notices Celia fighting Mucel's platoon, and she wonders what's going on. Celia then takes out all the girls in Mucel's platoon, and she faces off against Mucel, but Mucel manages to paralyze her, and he mentions that this is an ability of his holy sword called Force. Mucel then disarms Celia, and he mentions that he will take care of her after disposing of that kid. Everyone in Mucel's team then surrounds Leonis, and Celia thinks that she has to protect Leonis. Her desire to protect Leonis then helps Celia manifest her holy sword, and everyone is surprised to see this. Celia then uses her holy sword to defeat Mucel, and Mucel surrenders. Regina is happy to see that Celia has finally managed to awaken her holy sword, and the scene then cuts to Celia thanking Leonis, and Leonis mentions that Celia doesn't need to thank him as she is one of his minions. Celia asks Leonis what a minion is, and Leonis mentions that minions exist to protect their master. Celia then promises that she will protect Leonis as her big sister, but she wants Leonis to make her stronger as well. Leonis states that he will, and at night their platoon celebrates Celia awakening her holy sword, and Leonis joining their platoon. Alfina and the others are happy for Celia, and they wonder what kind of holy sword Celia got.
Celia mentions that it's a lightweight sword with a sharp blade, and Sakuya then suggests some names for the sword, but Celia mentions that she still hasn't seen the sword's true potential, so she will put the naming on hold. Alphina then tells Leonis to drop by her room later, as she needs to upload his biodata to the Academy's network, and Sakuya wonders where Leonis is going to stay. She mentions that all of their extra rooms are currently being used for storage, and Regina states that Leonis can stay with her. The other girls also invite Leonis to stay in their room, but Celia mentions that Leonis is going to stay in her room. The other girls wonder why, and Leonis mentions that it's because Celia was the one who found him, and she is also his guardian. The others agree with this, and Leonis thinks that sharing a room will make it easier for them to keep each other's secrets. The scene then cuts to Alphina analyzing Leonis with her orbs, and Leonis wonders if these are Alphina's holy swords. Alphina states that they are, and she mentions that they are called the Eyes of the Witch. She mentions that right now its main abilities include the collection, analysis, and transmission of data, and she states that in her previous platoon she was an attacker in charge of supplying firepower. But during one of their missions she watched two of her friends getting killed by voids, and after that her holy sword lost its original abilities. She states that she couldn't fight anymore, but Celia still invited her to this platoon. Alphina then finishes collecting Leonis's data, and Leonis then notices a map, and seeing him interested in it, Alphina gives him a tablet with the map. The scene then cuts to Leonis viewing the map, and he thinks that they are currently in the Seiken wastelands. Seeing the map he finds out that there is a correlation between void outbreaks and the locations of ancient battles, and he then summons Blackus. He asks him to tell him everything that he has learned thus far, and Blackus mentions that he has caught wind of some intriguing information. He mentions that this floating island has a subterranean core, and it's equipped with an enormous mana crystal. The humans called it a power plant, and he thinks that it might be the same thing that Goblin Lord Dizov used to power his castle. He mentions that this one is massive in size, and it's outfitted with intricate electrical circuits, and it seems to be distributing mana to the entire city. Leonis thinks that this could be a valuable asset if he can get his hands on it, and Blackus then leaves to continue his investigation. Sherry then comes there, and she gives Leonis a donut she brought for him. She mentions that she has brought a lot of other things for him, but Leonis asks her to tell him what she managed to find out first. Sherry then mentions that no one in this city knows anything about Leonis or the war that took place 1,000 years ago, and Leonis finds it strange that the world has forgotten such a major war. Sherry then asks Leonis if he has turned Celia into her minion, and Leonis wonders if there is a problem. We see that Sherry is jealous because of this, and Leonis mentions that Celia is a vampire queen, and with some training she could even become a valuable asset to him. This makes Sherry even more jealous, and Celia then comes there, and Sherry leaves. The scene then cuts to an expedition unit searching for void activity underwater, and they don't find any voids, but they see the tree-like creature that we saw before, and the creature kills them all. The story then goes to year 432 of the Holy God calendar, and we see Leonis being guided by someone in the Seiken wastelands. The man states that they are already short-staffed in the quarry, and they can't afford to have a gargoyle terrorizing them. He mentions that things are going to be alright now that the great hero of the Holy Sword is coming to their rescue, and Leonis states that he is merely doing his duty as the crown has ordered him to keep this area safe. The man mentions that Leonis is an honorable fellow for coming to their aid while the other 6 heroes are busy protecting the imperial capital and the holy city. Leonis states that monsters make for endearing opponents, and he mentions that he thinks that capturing and training one would be exciting. The man states that Leonis must be kidding as these don't sound like the words of the hero who defeated Zal Vadis the Demon Lord, and he then leads Leonis to the quarry. Leonis asks him where the gargoyle is, and he notices that the man has disappeared. Some mages then paralyze Leonis by using a spell, and some men come there, and they tie Leonis up. Leonis tries to free himself, but the men stab him with spears, and after resisting for a while Leonis dies. They then bring him down, and the men responsible for his death think that they no longer has to worry about Leonis posing a threat to their master. He mentions that they could have come to an agreement if Leonis showed any desire for money or power, and after a while Riselia comes there. She talks to Leonis's soul, and she mentions that this is sad, and she states that deep down Leonis must have known that this is a trap. She mentions that he is the savior of this world yet he was murdered by those in power. Leonis states that it's not an uncommon story, and Riselia asks him if he doesn't hate them for betraying him. Leonis states that this doesn't necessarily mean that those people are bad or evil, and Riselia then asks him if he believes that this world is just. Leonis mentions that it makes no difference to him, and Riselia realizes that this is his perspective, and she mentions that she is going to rebel against this world. She asks him if he is going to join her, and Leonis wonders why she is inviting him. Riselia states that she had her eye on Leonis for a while now, and she took a liking to him. She states that heroes are boring, and she asks Leonis to become hers. The story then comes back to the present, and Leonis wakes up, and he notices that he has bite marks on his neck. He then orders Celia to wake up, and Celia wakes up unintentionally. Celia wonders what just happened, and Leonis shows her a mark, and he mentions that this mark denotes authority. He mentions that he can use it to force obedience on his minions, so coaxing her into consciousness is easy. Celia then wonders if this means that she has to do everything that Leonis asks her, and Leonis mentions that she does. She wonders if this includes dirty stuff, and Leonis states that he would never do that. Celia remembers that Leonis behaved like a gentleman in the bath, and Leonis mentions that this is why he would like for her to behave like a lady, and he asks her if she drank his blood while he was asleep. Celia states that she did, as it was late, and she couldn't wait, and Leonis mentions that he doesn't mind her doing this, but she should at least say something first. Celia apologizes, and she then gets a call from Elfine. Elfine states that something has been bothering her, and she thought that she should let Celia know as she is their captain. Celia wonders what it is, and Elfine mentions that they called for a strategy meeting a while ago, and she thinks that it has something to do with the research team who went out on the marine survey. She states that they haven't uploaded their investigation results, and this early morning strategy meeting can't be a coincidence. She mentions that she will let her know if she hears anything, and she hangs up. Leonis then wonders if something is up, and Celia states that it's nothing, and she mentions that she doesn't have any classes today, so she wants Leonis to train her. The scene then cuts to the meeting Elfine talked about, and the acting commander of the 7th Assault Garden named Kartoros Nikio finds out that approximately 11 hours ago communications with the 13th Platoon ceased in the vicinity of Anchor 4. The chairman of the board Vite Leon mentions that the commander only spends half a year at the imperial capital on official business, and these irksome dilemmas always seem to occur in his absence. One of the researchers then states that they did detect void activity in the area in question, but it disappeared in just 3 seconds. The divisional commander Gillian Cooper states that it's not uncommon for voids to vanish or crystallize after running amok, but 3 seconds is far too quick. He wonders if the sensors malfunctioned, and the researchers state that they didn't, and they mention that they also have images. Kartoros thinks that these look like the roots of a tree, and Gillian wonders if this is a new species of voids, or a void lord. Vite asks him if he has any proof that it's a void lord, and Gillian states that it's just conjecture. Vite mentions that a void lord is synonymous to a stampede, and he states that they shouldn't forget the tragedy that happened 6 years ago when the voids attacked the 3rd Assault Garden. Gillian mentions that this tragedy is the reason why they have increased the defensive capabilities of the 7th Assault Garden, and the military advisor Baldur Valery states that the civilians have also made it a habit to practice their drills regularly. Vite states that the demi-human district is rife with people that scorn the Empire's rule, and he wonders if Baldur is certain that they won't attempt to induce panic. He states that they should move the city if there is a possibility of a stampede, and Gillian states that he can't agree with that as assault gardens were made to combat the voids. Kartoros then mentions that the commander has made his decision, and he wants them to immediately launch a follow-up investigation. Gillian understands, and he mentions that he will assemble a recon squadron made up of their top 3 platoons. The scene then cuts to Celia training, and she fights some training robots. She can easily take them on, and Leonis states that her technique is impressive. He wonders if she took sword lessons, and Celia states that she learned from her family when she was little, but she has been self-taught ever since coming to the academy, but she can't hold a candle to Sakuya. Leonis states that a vampire queen's true potential lies in her mana supply, and he mentions that he will teach her sorcery one of these days. He states that their best course of action would be to turn her into a spellblade, and he mentions that he will prepare some practical opponents for her. He then erects a barrier around them, and he summons some of his lowest-ranked minions. He mentions that Celia can feel free to let loose on them, and Celia then fights the minions. She manages to defeat them easily, and Leonis keeps on summoning more of them. After a while Celia gets tired, and Leonis mentions that they should call it a day. He uses magic to get rid of all of his dead minions, and Celia thanks Leonis for this. She asks Leonis to let her treat him to a meal as thanks, and she mentions that she knows a good restaurant. Leonis states that he can't mooch off her all the time, but his stomach growls.
The scene then cuts to the assault garden commencing its recon mission, and we then see Sakuya returning to the dorms.
We find out that she won her bet in the casino today, and she then notices Blackus sitting in front of the dorm. She notices that he doesn't have a collar, meaning that he doesn't belong to anyone, and she names her Mr. Fluffy Wuffy Black Fur. She gives him the things she bought with her casino winnings, and she mentions that he can eat it if he gets hungry, and she leaves. Regina then comes to Elfine's room, and she asks Elfine to taste the batter of some sweet potato rolls that she is making.
Elfine thinks that it's perfect, and Sakuya then enters the room, and she talks about the dog she met right now.
She mentions that she will introduce him to them sometime, and she then takes the other cup of the batter to eat as she is hungry. Regina then wonders why Elfine is wearing her school uniform on their day off, and Elfine states that it's just a precaution so she can be ready whenever their teacher calls her. She explains that she has been tasked with gathering and analyzing intel, and she mentions that the platoon that went on the marine survey still hasn't returned, so they got a recon squad headed out there. Elfine then asks Regina if she knows what Celia is up to, and Regina states that she must be doing what she does on their days off. Afterwards we see that Sherry has started working in a shop to make some money so she can buy sweets for Leonis, and the owner of the shop asks her to cut some potatoes, but she cuts the utensils along with the potatoes. The owner then asks her to just sweep the sidewalk, and she notices Leonis and Celia driving by the store when she tries to go out. She hides from them, and Celia then buys some donuts from the store, and they leave. Sherry wonders where they are going, and the scene cuts to them at the restaurant, and Leonis wonders if this is the place Celia was talking about. Some kids then come out and greet Celia, and Leonis wonders what's going on. Celia states that this place is a restaurant, but it's also the home of these kids. She asks Leonis to be nice to them as they are close to his age, and Leonis thinks that these kids are orphans just like him. He thinks that their lives are different than his, and they then head inside. Celia then talks with the kids, and one of them flips her skirt. Leonis tries to teach him a lesson, but Celia asks him to calm down as it's just a kid's prank. The owner of the restaurant named Frenia then comes there, and she wonders who this boy is. Celia introduces Leonis as the boy she found in the ruins, and she states that he is also a holy swordsman. The kids think that it's awesome, and they surround Leonis, and this makes him uncomfortable. Celia then mentions that she has brought donuts for everyone, and Frenia tells the kids that they are going to have the donuts at snack time later. Leonis then notices Celia having fun here, and he thinks that this must be the place she wants to protect. He thinks that he doesn't have a place to protect anymore, thinking about his castle, and the scene then cuts to the recon team noticing that there is nothing at the specified location.
Sakuya and Elfine then feel some tremors, and this alerts them, and Sakuya states that she is feeling uneasy.
The scene then cuts to some workers going to check the assault garden's food reserves, and they notice that the pantry is filled with roots. The story then goes back in time to the year 428, and we see that some monsters are attacking a city in the Ragna's kingdom. The woman we saw in the beginning named Tyrez Resurrection then states that waiting for Shadrach and the others isn't an option. An old man named Arakiel Degradio states that they must put an end to it within the city wall, and he uses a spell to burn down every resident of the town including the humans, and he states that he will be relying on Tyrez to bring them back to life. Arakiel mentions that the townspeople can be revived, so burning them along with monsters is the most logical path. 12-year-old Leonis can't stand to watch this, and he uses his sword to destroy Arakiel's spell. He states that murdering an entire town and bringing them back would be tedious, and he goes to slay the monsters. The townspeople notice him fighting the monsters, and after he defeats them all, they cheer for him. Arakiel then thinks that the hero of the Holy Sword, Leonis, is dangerous, and someday this power of his is going to dig his own grave. Back at the present we see that the tree-like void has entered the assault garden, and meanwhile the people in the control room wonder where the void could have gone. Gillian states that it could have crystallized again, and they must find and eliminate it before it manifests again.
Douglas then mentions that a holy swordswoman from the 18th platoon would like to share the results of her investigation with them, and hearing the two-digit designation Veit thinks that she must be a student. Douglas states that she is exceptionally gifted in research and data analysis, and she is the daughter of the Fillet family. Veit mentions that her father was an invaluable addition to his Arms Development Council, and he states that they should hear her out. Douglas then patches Elfine through, and she asks her to begin. Elfine mentions that a few minutes ago she detected localized micro-vibrations in Block 62 of the controlled access area beneath the assault garden, and at the same time and location she also detected mana waveforms with distinctive features. After amplifying them and removing background noise, she concluded that they do not align with any kind of magic device, and she also observed fluctuations in spatial mass which led to disruptions in the magnetic field, and this has created mobile network outages. She observed the same phenomenon in Block 59 moments later, and taking everything into account the data suggests the presence of void activity in the assault garden. Kartoros and the others state that this can't be, and the researchers in the room mention that it's subtle but they are detecting vibrations. They state that they have received reports of strange noises in Block 59, and they are investigating the source right now. Veit wonders why the void feedback is not registering on the mana scale, and the researcher mentions that it's because the feedback level measures below the scale's threshold, but the time and location of the vibrations do match. Gillian then wonders how could a void gain entry into the assault garden, and a researcher explains that there are gaps throughout the float module cluster as part of its design, and the void might have slipped through a crack. The male researcher then mentions that they are detecting minor damage to the bulkhead in Block 31, and the void seems to be on the move again. Veit wonders why the void isn't using magic, and Elfine states that it might be disguising its movement intentionally to sneak farther inside the city. Veit mentions that voids don't possess this level of intelligence, and Elfine asks them if they ever found a crystal indicating the disappearance of this void. The people in the room then receive a report that there are roots growing in the pantry. They send somebody to look into it, and back in Platoon 18 Storms we see that Regina is unable to contact Celia, and Elfine sends one of her drones to the facility where Celia has gone. Regina then asks Elfine if voids have invaded the city, and Elfine states that she hopes that there aren't too many of them. She tells them to be ready to move out, and we find out that Sherry has disappeared from her workplace. Meanwhile at the restaurant we see that the children are having lunch, and one of them named Dean asks Leonis if he can see his holy sword. Tessera states that Dean shouldn't bother Leonis like this, and she states that she thinks that it's cool that Leonis can wield a holy sword. A team of soldiers then arrive at the pantry, and they ask for further orders. The roots there become active, and they go on the offensive, and the soldiers return fire. Baldur states that they should issue an evacuation alert as soon as possible, and Kartoros tries to reach the commander, but he is unable to do so. Gillian mentions that there is only one target so they should be able to deal with it themselves, and Baldur calls a board meeting to get the preparations underway. The video feed from the pantry then gets restored, and they find out that the void has managed to escape. Gillian wonders what this thing is, and he states that void attacks are supposed to be brief and isolated. The researchers then notice the route that the void is taking, and they find out that the void is heading towards the power plant. Elfine states that if this void is a void lord, and it manages to access the massive reserves of energy in the power plant, then it could trigger a stampede. Kartoros then tells everyone to protect the power plant, and Gillian mentions that they have a robust intercept system in the power plant, and he also sends his men there. The void then enter the power plant, and the defense system there activates, and it shoots the void. The soldiers also shoot the void, and meanwhile Kartoros issues a command to shift the assault garden into fortress mode, and evacuate the citizens into the shelter, and prepare military personnel for a stampede. Everyone understands, and Gillian mentions that he will set up his command post in the command room, and he asks Douglas to stay here. The scene then cuts to the children in the restaurant asking Leonis to show them his holy sword, and Celia states that Leonis should give them a peek of it, as the kids are asking so nicely. Leonis then mentions that he will treat these kids to an even more spectacular performance, and he makes some of his tiny skeletons perform some tricks. The kids are disgusted seeing the skeletons, and meanwhile the soldiers are still firing at the void. The intercept system in the power plant room has been destroyed, and the void then makes contact with the power plant. The soldiers stop firing as they are afraid of hitting the power plant, and the void sucks energy from the power plant. The city then goes on an alert, and Celia notices that the assault garden is undergoing a mode shift.
She notices a large number of voids attacking the assault garden, and she can't believe that a stampede is taking place here.
The city then completes the mode shift, and they launch a high-altitude emergency signal.
Vite states that it will take 3 days for the assistance from the capital to arrive, and he wonders if they can hold out for that long. Douglas mentions that they have to, and she states that they have trained their holy swordsmen well, and they aren't so weak that they would admit defeat in just 3 days.
We then see that Platoon 18 is somewhere in the city, and Regina wonders what they should do about Celia.
Elfine states that they are expected to defend their assigned district in event of an emergency, and she mentions that Celia should be on her way right now. She states that for now they should focus on the enemy in front of them, and the city's defenses activate and the automatic guns start firing down the voids.
Sakuya and the others also equip their holy swords, and they fight the voids.
Seeing this, Leonis thinks that the offensive capabilities of the humans are impressive, and Celia states that she can't get in touch with the academy. She then goes to take the children to the shelter, and Leonis meets Sherry. She asks Leonis how he would like to proceed in this situation, and Leonis asks her to protect his minions' friends. Sherry states that she would rather protect Leonis, and Leonis tells her to quit complaining and go. Celia then tries to guide the children to the shelter, but Leonis asks her to not let them out as it's dangerous here. Celia notices that there are voids outside, and she activates her holy sword to fight them. Leonis thinks that Celia has yet to awaken her true potential as vampire queen, and he asks Celia if she isn't frightened. Celia states that she is, but she can't run away at a time like this.
Leonis thinks that Celia shows a lot of promise, and he can't let these creatures ruin such an excellent minion. Celia then takes out a few voids, and Leonis takes care of the rest of them using a flame spell. Celia is surprised to see this, and Leonis mentions that there are more incoming.
He notices a big dragon-like void, and he thinks that this brings back memories. Meanwhile, 3 ogre-class voids come to attack Platoon 18, and Sakuya takes care of them with her blade of lightning. Regina and the others then take care of all the voids within a 300-meter radius, and they then notice a Hydra-class void in the distance, and they think that this one might be a bit trickier. Leonis then checks out the dragon-like void, and he can't believe that even the mighty dragon race has been reduced to voids. He thinks that an ordinary spell won't be enough to kill that creature if it has the same magical resistance as a dragon, and he asks Celia to keep the other voids busy while he casts a powerful spell.
Celia then fights the other voids, and Leonis uses this time to cast a spell.
He wonders why he is protecting a human city, and he thinks that he can't turn a blind eye to people who pick a fight with him and his minion. He then uses the level 10 spell called Zamexis Jura on the dragon-like void, and the spell manages to bring the void down, but it's not enough to defeat it. Leonis thinks that this human body reduces his ability to chant quickly, and Blackus then comes there, and he distracts the void. This gives Leonis enough time to cast another level 10 spell called Grand Mazikis, and this manages to defeat the dragon-like void. Celia can't believe that Leonis managed to defeat a mega-colossal void on his own, and the earth below Celia then starts to crack. From below come some roots which grab Celia, and they take her inside the cracks. The Void Lord then comes out of the crack, and Leonis realizes that the Void Lord is actually Arakiel de Gradios. Thanks for watching parts 1 to 5, the rest of the parts will be on my channel. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed it.